Hello, all you freedom-loving people. So will stable coins that are pegged to the US dollar cause the demise of the Chinese yuan? Momentum is building around the CDC shakeup and Lisa Cook's firing, and the US greenlit $825 million in arms for Ukraine. Okay, let's get into it. Today, U.S. District Judge Jai Cobb asked lawyers for President Trump and for former Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook to submit more arguments in the lawsuit against the firing of Lisa Cook. On Monday, President Trump announced that he fired Cook for allegations of mortgage fraud. But Cook hasn't been charged with a crime yet. So today's hearing was mostly centered on the question, did President Trump have cause to fire Cook? Judge Cobb is struggling with whether Cook's firing before the mortgage fraud lawsuit is resolved would hurt her irreparably. Previously, we reported that Cook is accused of saying on mortgage documents that houses in Michigan and Georgia would both be her primary residence. President Trump claimed that because Cook hasn't offered any defense against the accusation in public or private, he has lost confidence in her. Abbe Lowell, Cook's lawyer, argued that leaving Cook in limbo means that she doesn't know if she will be removed from the Fed's offices, have her electronics turned off, and be barred from future meetings. Lowell said that if you take Cook out of limbo, then they can conform to a schedule. Lowell asked Judge Cobb to temporarily block the firing while the mortgage fraud case is being heard. Judge Cobb didn't respond directly, but she asked for more arguments to elaborate on the case. Judge Cobb also said that she was happy to set an anticipated schedule for when she will decide the case. The next step is for Lowell to file a written response to the Trump administration's arguments by September 2nd. So far, the Fed said isn't taking a position on Cook's removal, and it will follow whatever the court decides. But the Fed urged the court to rule promptly to remove the existing cloud of uncertainty. The Fed is scheduled to meet September 16th and 17th. But lawyers for the Trump administration said that those dates are beyond the customary 14-day limit for a court order temporarily blocking a policy. A Department of Health and Human Services official has been selected to serve as the acting director of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. On Wednesday, we reported that the White House fired Susan Menares as the director of the CDC. And yesterday, President Trump appointed HHS Deputy Secretary Jim O'Neill as the CDC's acting director. O'Neill worked at the HHS during the George W. Bush administration. He served as Assistant Deputy Secretary, and he held other roles. After departing the government in 2008, he worked in investments, including the hedge fund Mithril Capital. Previously, Menares became the first CDC director since 1953 who did not have a medical degree. But O'Neill does not hold a medical degree or have medical training either. In June, during his confirmation hearing, when he was picked as HHS Deputy Secretary, O'Neill said that he learned a lot about health and the HHS from his time in government and from working with entrepreneurs who are developing new research in medicines. O'Neill also said in the same hearing that he's very strongly pro-vaccine and he supports the immunization schedule of the CDC. But back in 2022, O'Neill also criticized the CDC over how it redefined the word vaccine. He also criticized how the agency was holding back some data on COVID-19 cases among the vaccinated. In the meantime, Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is scheduled to testify before a Senate panel on September 4th. Senator Ron Wyden, the ranking member of the panel, said in a statement, "After the mass firings and resignations of respected senior scientists and public servants at CDC over the last 24 hours, it is more imperative than ever that Kennedy answer to the public and their representatives about the chaos, confusion, and harm his actions are inflicting on American families." Yesterday, we reported that Kennedy clarified his actions during a press conference in Texas by saying, There's a lot of trouble at CDC, and it's going to require getting rid of some people over the long term in order for us to change the institutional culture and bring back pride and self-esteem and make that agency the stellar agency that it always has been. Yesterday, Senator Bill Cassidy, who chairs the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, also called for the vaccine advisors meeting to be postponed. On Tuesday, we reported that this advisory group for the CDC will review COVID-19 vaccines and investigate various issues like how long mRNA stays in the body and if there is DNA damage. The meetings are scheduled to take place on September 18th and 19th. Yesterday, the United States approved a potential $825 million munitions deal with Ukraine. The deal includes long-range missiles and gear to fight the Russian invasion. Under the deal, Ukraine would receive 3,350 extended-range attack ammunition missiles and 3,350 navigation modules, along with required component parts, support equipment, and logistical support. Officials said that Ukraine will cover the deal using money from Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, and U.S. military aid. The Defense Security Cooperation Agency said that the munitions would help improve Ukraine's capacity to conduct self-defense and regional security missions. The State Department approved the arms sales, and defense officials notified Congress of the deal. The deal came as Russia steps up attacks on Ukraine, while the Trump team pushes for peace talks to end the war. Ukrainian President Zelensky said on X that Russia launched more than 30 missiles and 600 drones at Kyiv yesterday. The strikes yesterday killed at least 19 people, injured dozens, and damaged sites that were tied to the British Council, the EU delegation, the Azerbaijani embassy, and a Turkish enterprise. On the same day, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt also reacted to the news at a press briefing.
The drone and missile strikes that took place overnight in Ukraine, General Keith Kellogg, the president's special envoy, has described these attacks as egregious. Do you agree with that description, and do you view President Putin as an impediment to getting peace between these two countries?
Well, it's not about if I agree, it's about what the president thinks, and I know what the president thinks because I talked to him about this. He was not happy about this news, but he was also not surprised. These are two countries that have been at war for a very long time. Russia launched this attack on Kyiv, and likewise, Ukraine recently dealt a blow to Russia's oil refineries. They have taken out, as a matter of fact, 20% of Russia's oil refinery capacity over the course of their attacks throughout the month of August. So the president is continuing to watch this intently, and this killing, unfortunately, will continue as long as the war continues, which is why the president wants it to end.
Europe and Australia hit the Islamic Republic of Iran with new sanctions and diplomatic pressure. In response, the Islamic Republic called the move political and illegal. Recently, the Australian intelligence agency concluded that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard orchestrated two anti-Semitic arson attacks in 2024. One attack took place at a Sydney kosher restaurant. The other attack targeted Melbourne's Adass Israel Synagogue, which the Islamic Republic hired criminals to carry out. In response, Australia kicked out the Iranian ambassador and 3 diplomats and blamed the Islamic Republic for anti-Semitic arsons in Australia. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that Australia will list the Revolutionary Guard of the Islamic Republic as a terrorist group. The move puts Australia in line with the United States, Canada, Lithuania, and Belgium. In response, the Iranian ambassador to Australia called the allegations false and political. And he said that Australia acted to punish the Islamic Republic for supporting Palestine. In the meantime, experts say that China and Russia, the key partners of the Islamic Republic, are likely to respond cautiously. Today, Russia and China put forward a draft resolution at the United Nations Security Council that would extend the 2015 Iran nuclear deal for 6 months. They also called on all parties to return to the table for immediate talks, but so far, Russia and China have not requested a vote on the resolution. The UK, France, and Germany anticipated the so-called snapback mechanism on Thursday. The 30-day process could bring back UN sanctions on the Islamic Republic like those that were in place in 2010. In 2020, key Islamic Republic officials were sanctioned with arms restrictions, asset freezes, bank limitations, and travel bans. In a letter to the UN, the three countries said that they're open to talking with the Islamic Republic, but remain firm on stopping it from getting nuclear weapons. On the same day, Secretary of State Marco Rubio welcomed the European action. Rubio said that the U.S. would work with Europe to restore sanctions, but is still ready for direct talks with the Islamic Republic. Meanwhile, tensions between the Islamic Republic and the International Atomic Energy Agency have escalated. After Israeli and U.S. attacks on its military and nuclear sites, the Islamic Republic cut back on cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. It also warned that it may quit the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty if sanctions return. The Islamic Republic also announced restrictions on some of the senior inspectors of the agency. In response, Rafael Grossi, who heads the agency, warned that without full access, no one can trust the nuclear program of the Islamic Republic to be peaceful. And today, the three European countries proposed that if the Islamic Republic restores access for UN nuclear inspectors, if it addresses concerns over its enriched uranium stockpile, and if it re-enters negotiations with the United States, the so-called snapback mechanism would be delayed for 6 months. Barbara Woodward, the UK ambassador to the UN who read the statement, said, "Our requests were fair and realistic, yet to this day, Iran has shown no sign of seriousness in meeting them." Europe and Australia sent the Islamic Republic a clear message that more costs are coming if Iran keeps pushing. Now, the world waits to see. Will the Islamic Republic continue confrontation, or will it accept direct talks with the United States or Europe? Over the past year, Europe and the United States have shifted from avoiding and observing cryptocurrency to actively implementing regulatory policies. Meanwhile, the United States has also taken the initiative to promote stable coins. The impact of this new U.S. policy extends far beyond America's borders. It is the Chinese Communist Party across the ocean that is most concerned about this. To discuss the impact of the U.S. stablecoin legislation on China, we must first understand China's financial system, most notably its monetary policy. After humanity ceased using precious metals like gold and silver as currency, it entered the modern monetary system. The establishment of this modern monetary system is attributed to the great scientist Isaac Newton. Yes, that very genius we all know, the one who discovered universal gravitation after observing an apple fall from a tree. Few may realize that he was also a great economist. At the age of 56, he formally became Warden of the Royal Mint. At that time, the age of exploration was drawing to a close. Britain was expanding its reach across the globe and establishing colonies. One factor constraining Britain's development was currency. The supply of gold and silver was finite. If coins had to contain a sufficient quantity of precious metals, then the amount of currency available was consequently limited. In 1717, upon Newton's recommendation, the British Parliament passed a resolution establishing the exchange ratio between gold and precious metal coins. 1 ounce of gold equaled precious metal coins with a face value of £3, 17 shillings and 10 pence, with the British government officially guaranteeing its exchange. This meant that from then on, coins issued by the British government could contain less precious metal than their face value. For example, a 10 pence coin issued at the time could contain gold worth only 7 pence. However, the British government's official promise of exchange gave this underweight coin sufficient credibility to be used as a full 10 pence. People's confidence in the British government naturally extended to the gold coin it issued. Even the paper currency issued by Britain in its various colonies held value because it was backed by the British government. The British government's credit became the foundation for currency issuance. Of course, not all governments possess sufficient creditworthiness to back their currencies. Therefore, for international trade, there must be a universally recognized international currency. Naturally, the currency issued by the most powerful nation will gain the widest acceptance. By the mid-18th century, the British Empire had become the unparalleled sun-never-sets empire. Its colonies spanned the globe, and the pound sterling naturally became the international currency. Its use persisted until the Great Depression of the 1930s, when the British government's finances neared collapse. By then, it could no longer sustain its role as the international currency. Consequently, the convertibility pledge had to be abandoned in 1931. A nation's currency loses its status as an international currency not because of whether it's pegged to gold, but because of a crisis in national credit. After World War II, the United States emerged as the new global hegemon. In 1944, at the United Nations Conference on International Monetary Affairs, held in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, Harry White, then the Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, persuaded other delegates to adopt the U.S. dollar as the international currency. Simultaneously, the U.S. government pledged to the world that it would guarantee, with the full faith and credit of the nation, the convertibility of 35 U.S. dollars into 1 troy ounce of gold. Later, when President Nixon ended the official convertibility of the dollar into gold in 1971, the dollar's status as a world reserve currency remained completely unaffected. This was because the United States remained the world's preeminent power at the time, possessing unchallenged economic and military leadership, and its national credit stood as unshakable. Whether it was the British Empire's gold standard or the early dollar gold peg system of the Bretton Woods era, the mechanism that truly enabled their effectiveness was national credit. Currency is essentially a form of credit bond issued by the government. But the Chinese Communist Party insists that the currency it issues is a sovereign currency, one that can gain credibility independently without relying on the backing of the US dollar. Therefore, it does not peg its exchange rate to the dollar based on market prices, but instead, the CCP imposes an official, rigidly fixed rate. Of course, this approach is unsustainable. In 1986, the official exchange rate between the US dollar and the Chinese yuan was 3.45, but the black market rate consistently fluctuated between 8 and 10. Aside from a handful of Western European and Japanese companies with political objectives, virtually no foreign enterprises were willing to invest significantly in China or engage in business with the country. The Chinese Communist Party's insistence on pursuing a sovereign currency path came at the cost of fundamentally stifling economic development. By 1993, China's economy had finally reached the brink of collapse, with inflation soaring to 15% that year. Prices rose by 24% in 1994 and remained high at 17% in 1995. Finally, in 1994, the Chinese Communist Party officially devalued the renminbi exchange rate to 8.62. Although this was an official rate, it was now much closer to the market price. As a result, China experienced a genuine surge in large-scale foreign investment, and its foreign exchange reserves began to rise. By 1999, China's foreign exchange reserves had grown to 13 times their 1990 level. The flood of foreign capital saved China's economy. Especially after China joined the WTO in 2001, foreign investment poured into China even more intensely. This influx of foreign capital rescued the Chinese Communist Party. The central bank, whose capital chain was on the verge of collapse, received massive foreign exchange inflows, thereby becoming financially robust. By 2013, the US dollar accounted for 83% of the People's Bank of China's total assets. In other words, the credibility of the renminbi was almost entirely underpinned by the dollar. This explains why the Chinese Communist Party has consistently enforced strict foreign exchange controls. It could not afford the dollar outflows. A report by the U.S. think tank Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, analyzes that a major pillar of Beijing's governance structure is its so-called financial manipulation system. Through strict capital controls, it locks domestic funds within the country and channels them into state-owned banks. So, how should we understand this? After seizing power, the Chinese Communist Party consistently implemented a planned economy. Prior to the reform and opening up of the 1980s, there were no private enterprises in China. These state-owned enterprises not only operated detached from market demand, but also suffered from outdated technology and extremely low efficiency. Foreign capital and Western enterprises entering China have indeed injected vitality into the Chinese economy. However, they have simultaneously challenged state-owned enterprises. Unable to adapt to the competitive environment of a free market economy, these enterprises quickly found themselves on the brink of bankruptcy. To keep them operational, the Chinese Communist Party has had no choice but to continuously print money to subsidize them. Even so, these enterprises remain unprofitable and unable to repay their debts to the government. The year 2002 marked the most perilous period for China's economy since the launch of reform and opening up, with the debt chain teetering on the brink of collapse. At this critical juncture, the Clinton administration facilitated the Chinese Communist Party's ascension to the WTO, effectively saving the regime. Simultaneously, the CCP resolved to relinquish its sovereignty over monetary policy, and it abandoned its insistence on state-owned enterprises' dominant position. Beyond finance, mining, telecommunications, transportation, and military sectors, all other fields were open to private enterprise and free competition. The enterprises retained by the CCP were almost entirely controlled by privileged families. These enterprises remained loss-making, and they still required massive government money printing to subsidize them. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party also subsidizes companies that export their products. This way, Chinese enterprises can compete with companies from other countries at prices below cost, using ultra-low pricing strategies to dominate global markets. In the short term, everyone sees cheap products as a good thing. But now we can clearly see that the long-term result is widespread decline in Western manufacturing, leaving them dependent on China. This consequence became especially severe during the pandemic. The enterprises remained loss-making, but the CCP's money printing did not trigger inflation. This is because it was anchored to the foreign exchange reserves held by the party. Companies doing business in China know that once invested in dollars, capital finds it difficult to leave the country. Americans working in China cannot demand dollar-denominated wages either. They can only receive renminbi salaries or a form of foreign exchange token. This is because the dollar has become the foundation of the renminbi's credit. The CFR report states that this mechanism not only maintains national financial stability, but also ensures elite loyalty to the party by selectively providing low-cost funding. But once dollar-pegged stablecoins circulate on a large scale, this arrangement may become ineffective. If Chinese enterprises and individuals freely conduct cross-border payments and capital outflows through dollar-pegged stable coins, this would weaken Beijing's control over capital flows. The dollar-pegged stable coins could freely flow out of China on the blockchains like Stellar. For the Chinese Communist Party, this poses a survival-threatening challenge. Therefore, the Chinese Communist Party is also taking proactive measures. Reuters reports that the CCP is reviewing and they may approve a new plan for the internationalization of the renminbi, which includes allowing the issuance of renminbi-backed stable coins for the first time. In fact, the CCP is currently facing a situation where massive amounts of private capital are fleeing the country. China's capital outflow in July hit a record high. So at this juncture, would the CCP's issuance of stable coins exacerbate capital flow? The answer is yes. However, failing to develop a renminbi stable coin would hinder progress in the renminbi's internationalization. Swift data shows that in June of 2025, the renminbi's share of the global payment market stood at just 2.88%, a two-year low. By comparison, the US dollar accounted for 47.19%. Moreover, the CFR report speculates that export-oriented enterprises in China may be the first to adopt US dollar-pegged stable coins. Over time, these stable coins could even permeate everyday payments, gradually replacing the renminbi. Neither scenario is desirable for the Chinese Communist Party. Either way, the issuance of stable coins inevitably undermines the CCP's governing foundation. But does the CCP really have any other options? And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for your support of Front Page. Please remember to leave a comment below the video. This is really helping us to be seen all around the world. The more people who watch Front Page, the more freedom-loving people the world will have. And please hit the like button and hit the notification bell after subscribing. And please share this video with your friends and family because everybody deserves to know the truth.